theme of this session is to try and talk about what the context is now, since Tory's been around for a while. We know how people tended to vote during the past election, but there's certain critical challenges which we know are important for us around public transit, particularly those of us who don't live like I do, 2 blocks away from the downtown suburb or subway, which is easier to people in different parts of the city. And we want to explore what our needs and our interests are in those areas and what our neighbors are thinking, and how do we merge the public transit system, the public transit movement with social justice movement at the same time, and with a climate change movement. My name is Herman Rosenfeld. I'm a member of TTC Riders and the Free and Accessible Transit campaign of the Greater Toronto Workers' Assembly and numerous other things. But this is a kind of a joint effort between the Free Transit campaign and TTC Riders. And where it came from is that in the context of growing the public transit movement, we wanted to have a public debate around all aspects of public transit, particularly the demands around the city about funding, affordability, the need for growing access for working people, and in the context of provincial and city elections. They're over. I mean, they're not even that important to us when you think about it. But transit was there, but it wasn't there in terms of things like affordability, whether there's enough, whether it serves our needs, and what's the interrelationship between issues of public transit, equity and accessibility, and how people see themselves. We'll have 3 speakers. Kamilla Petrick, who is going to be speaking for Free Accessible Transit campaign, is also an activist in the TTC Riders as we do this growth.
Thanks, Herman. I've been an activist in the Free Transit campaign since it started in 2010. So we have been around for 5 years now. And I want to talk to you about this campaign. I'm going to introduce it, try to make the case for free transit, why it's a good idea, whose time has come, tell you a little bit about some of the activities that we engaged in the name of this cause over the past few years. I'm going to talk about how this campaign fits into the broader global movement for free transit, talk about some of the initiatives that are happening in other places, and I'm going to close by talking about how our campaign has been impacted vis-a-vis the election of our so-called transit mayor, John Tory. I want to begin by acknowledging that transit is the lifeblood of our city, of any city. It is a vital part of any city's infrastructure. And as such, it is actually at the intersection of a number of very important social struggles today, because the people who rely on public transit the most tend to be students, tend to be the working class, tend to be people on disability. Single women rely very heavily on public transit, women with strollers who are struggling to fit the strollers on public transit all the time. So one of the reasons why this campaign was selected as the campaign, one of the campaigns, priority campaigns, back in 2010 was because transit is located at the intersection of a number of very important social struggles today. And it was actually selected as a priority campaign in 2010 by a broader organization. Both Herman and I belong to it. It's called the Greater Toronto Workers' Assembly, GTWA. And back in 2010, this organization decided that we would actually take on public transit as one of our key issues because it affects people in Toronto in so many different ways and speaks to so many different social justice issues. So our perspective vis-a-vis transit is an anti-capitalist socialist perspective. As members of the Greater Toronto Workers' Assembly, this is the kind of view that we bring to our engagement with the question of public transit. We essentially seek to challenge the capitalist logic that currently animates all the policies vis-a-vis public transit in the city. We believe that transit should be publicly planned, publicly built, publicly maintained, and that this all fits into the broader picture of a campaign that was quite active in the mid-2000s that has somewhat died down still, but still continues to inform our work and our engagement with public transit, and that is the right to the city. I'm not sure if any of you have heard about this campaign before, but it is aligned with our perspective insofar as we believe that it is the people of a city that should have a democratic say into how the programs are provided, how the various funding priorities are decided, and that they should have a right to decide how transit gets built, how it gets maintained, how it's run. And that is part of the bigger vision for having a livable, walkable, friendly city that we can all be happy to call home. So for us, this movement is about transit justice, and this is the kind of expression that we like to use, that we are part of building and growing a transit justice movement in the city. And we knew already back in 2010 that there's a lot of anger and frustration among residents of the city around the state of public transit, but it is more difficult than one would like to admit sometimes to actually channel some of that anger and frustration into constructive political action. But we are happy to say that we do have a growing transit movement in the city here, and that our work as part of the free transit campaign of the GTWA is the left wing, the far radical wing of that movement, because we do have a socialist anti-capitalist vision which connects some of the intermediate goals towards which we are striving as members of TTC Riders and other transit groups to a bigger long-term vision that is about decommodifying, ultimately decommodifying public transit, because we believe that it is a public service that should be provided by the state and shouldn't be funded out of the taxpayers' pockets. We in Canada are very proud that we have free healthcare for everybody who needs it, regardless of their ability to pay, and we believe that time has come to do the same thing for public transit, so we can actually talk about this system being public. Because the reality is that in Toronto, we actually have the least publicly subsidized transit system in all of North America, and in fact in all of the G20 countries, I recently heard. Andy Byford, who is the CEO of TTC, is also all too happy to share some of these figures. At the most recent TTC commission, where a number of us deputed, he mentioned that, he mentioned the very same statistic that I just did, and I believe he said that in Toronto it is to the tune of 84 cents or 85 cents that riders are subsidized, whereas in all of the major North American metropolitan areas, for instance, in Chicago and in New York, that number is much higher. So in Chicago, riders are subsidized to $1.99. So we in Toronto get less than half of that subsidy. And in fact, our public transit system used to be much more heavily subsidized, particularly by the province, back in the 1990s, until Mike Harris' government came in and removed all of that subsidy in '95. And this is something that, as members of the Free Transit Campaign, as well as TTC Riders, we are calling for the restoration of that subsidy. But again, the Free Transit Campaign has a longer-term vision, which is to eventually decommodify public transit, which is a long-term radical vision, a radical goal that we believe a series of intermediate steps will help us in achieving eventually. When it comes to making the case for free public transit, there's a lot of really good reasons why that idea makes sense and why we believe its time has come. There are a number of places around the world that are implementing either partially free or fully fare-free systems, and there's a growing list of those cities that's available. If you go to a website called freepublictransports.com, we have those cute pink stickers with that URL in the back of the table, where we have a bunch of other literature. Of course, you're all welcome to help yourselves. And there's a growing list of cities, particularly in Poland, my native country. I'm happy to say that almost every month there's a new city or town that joins the list of places that offer free public transit in response to residents' demand, essentially. And it's because people around the world are recognizing all of the benefits that come with having free public transport. And those are benefits that we would, in Toronto, very much stand to enjoy as well, particularly given the fact that we in Toronto have a very serious gridlock problem, right? And it is, of course, the major premise that got John Tory elected, because with his idea of smart track, people were very excited about the possibility of the congestion, the gridlock in Toronto finally being alleviated. And I'll get to some of the problems with John Tory's platform in just a second, but it is the case that making transit free would essentially help in a very significant way to alleviate the gridlock problem we have in Toronto, which now is worse than New York, is worse than LA and other places. We're very much invested in the idea of getting cars off the road, and we recognize that even drivers who don't necessarily take public transit are in many ways actually on board with this idea of free transit, because they would also benefit from having less congestion, fewer cars on the road. And another very key component in relation to that, of course, is the environmental piece. Virtually all of us who are part of this growing transit movement are also environmental activists, and we are very much on board with the idea that we need better air quality. And I don't know how many of you know this, but there are dozens of deaths across the GTA every single year linked to the poor air quality. We have children who are suffering from respiratory diseases, and all of these problems could be reduced if we have a better public transit system and we have fewer people feeling the need to get in a car and contribute to those problems. One success story that I wanted to share as a way of talking about some of the things that are being done internationally is of a place that did resolve its very serious gridlock problem. It's a place in Belgium called Hasselt. I'm not sure if any of you have heard about it before. It's a city in Belgium that implemented free public transit system across the entire city, and within a year the ridership shot up by several 100%. So it is a huge success story that the growing European free transit movement is happy to share, because it goes to show you, actually I have the number here, it was by 800% within a year. That was the growth of ridership. What we have in Toronto instead is a mayor that broke his promise to keep fares frozen in 2015. And that means with the fare hike that is actually coming into effect today, that we're going to lose a bunch of riders. Some of the statistics say that every time you increase fares, you lose about 2 million riders. And of course, that is a completely reactionary, regressive policy. What we should be doing is making transit more accessible and more affordable to everybody, again, regardless of their ability to pay. Because, again, transit is the lifeblood of any city, and it is key to reducing climate change, to reducing smog, improving air quality, and also making it accessible to people who need it. Again, these tend to be people of color, people who are marginalized, people who can't afford it otherwise, or people who are just trying to do the right thing and not contribute to air pollution and climate change. And the current policies that we have with John Tory essentially mean that all of us who do take public transit for all of the good reasons we have for doing so are being penalized by being asked to shoulder even more of the cost of TTC's operations. So in terms of some of the things that are happening globally, I already mentioned that there's a vibrant movement in Poland, and almost every month there's new cities that have free transit in that country. Again, if you go to that website, there's a list of places. I'm just going to mention some of them. In Czech Republic, there's in Aubagne in France. Chapel Hill has partially free transit in the United States. Coral Gables. So a lot of these cities are admittedly smaller than Toronto. They tend to be university towns or resort towns, but there is a growing movement to make free transit a reality in bigger municipalities, and we think that insofar as Toronto likes to consider itself a world-class city, that it could perhaps embark on this idea of becoming a pioneer in terms of trying to offer free transit system either on certain routes during certain times as a stepping stone to making it free all the time for everybody, very much in line with public healthcare in Canada. One of the more exciting places in Europe where there's a lot of activity, very strong activity around public transit, is in Scandinavia. I don't know if you have heard of a group called Planka. They are based in Sweden and in Norway. Planka essentially is both a noun and a verb that means, I guess I'll jump. And it has to do with the fact that what they offer in Scandinavia is free rider insurance. It works a little bit differently over there in the sense that you can enter their public transit system and you don't have to pay every time. It kind of works on the honor system, which we're implementing more and more now, this proof of payment kind of idea. So it is possible to board a transit vehicle there. And it is only when a controller comes around and asks you for your ticket that you could potentially get into trouble if you don't have one. So to protest the really high fares that our comrades and the people in Norway and Sweden are facing, they came up with this free rider insurance, which essentially you pay into on a monthly basis. It's a fraction of what you would otherwise have to pay for the monthly Metro Pass or for the cost of riding every day. And if you get caught by a controller, then they will pay your fine. We looked into the possibility of doing something like this here. However, it is a different category of offense. There is kind of like a municipal ticket, equivalent of a parking ticket, slap on the wrist. It's a different, more serious category of offense if you were to do the same thing in Toronto. So we're not advocating this at all. But I did want to flag this because this movement is getting a lot of publicity. They have been written up by the CBC recently, actually, and also in the New York Times. So I encourage you to check them out. We have met with them. They have recently come to Toronto. We had an international free transit movement forum here, and we welcome comrades from the United States and from all over Europe, including comrades in Planka. And I actually had met them a few years ago when one of the earlier free transit conferences were held, and I was given the opportunity to travel to Berlin. There's a free transit movement in Germany as well. There's stuff happening in Mexico as well. There's a movement that comes with its own hashtag called Pósme Salto. I'm not a Spanish speaker, but it means, I guess I'll jump. I think it's similar to what Planka means. Yeah, I guess I'll jump. And again, it was in response to a very dramatic fair hike that occurred in 2013. And you had young people particularly organized jumping turnstiles. So that was the idea there as well. In Brazil, you have something called the Movimento Passe Livre, which means the free passage movement, and that emerged actually out of the 2005 World Social Forum, but now has evolved into its own initiative. It is based particularly in Sao Paulo, and it is also one of the movements that we are trying to establish solidarity with. So these are just a few of the more prominent examples, but it is again something that is picking up more momentum in a variety of places around the world. And so we are happy to think of ourselves as part of the growing global momentum in favor of the idea of free transit. So in Toronto, over the last few years, we have done a number of initiatives promoting this idea. We have done educationals, things like this, where a bunch of us will come together and talk about the issues and hope to mobilize many people to join our initiatives to grow the movement further here in the city. We have done guerrilla theater, where we will go on transit vehicles and do little plays to get the people on transit vehicles interested, but not in a very off-putting way. So we have a lot of these creative actions that we do. We produce a number of pamphlets of the literature that we have in the back that we have produced over the last few years. So again, feel free to take as much of it as you want and pass it on. And Millen and Brenda will speak to some of the strategies that we have been engaged in as members of TTC Riders. So I'll leave it up to them to talk about. And the last thing I just wanted to mention, because we are gathered here today to think through ideas and strategies for growing the movement vis-a-vis John Tory having been elected. And so John Tory got elected on the platform of being the transit-friendly, the transit mayor. He had this whole smart truck idea, and our take on it is that it is not very smart at all if you take a closer look at it. There's a number of problems with it. First of all, we're not quite sure where all the money for this smart truck is going to come from. The federal funding piece is still missing. And there are some things to be happy about. I mean, when we're asked as members of TTC Riders, particularly because we are emerging as the kind of go-to voice on behalf of transit riders when the media want the soundbite, we are reacting to whatever Tory has got planned. We do say that we are happy about some of the things in terms of the service improvements, the idea that kids under 12 will get to ride for free. That's great. But we are very upset at the fare hike because a large part of our constituency, and we've been hearing this from people all over the place, is that it is already very unaffordable as it is, and to ask transit riders to shield more of the cost of TTC operations is simply unfair and unsustainable. So Tory has really no plan vis-a-vis affordability and accessibility of the TTC. He has said yes, I believe, on paper to the downtown relief line and Finch and Shepherd LRT, but does not prioritize them, and it does not seem to be very important to him. And ultimately, he is a conservative. He is a neocon. His vision is a neoliberal one, which is directly in contradiction to the kind of socialist vision that sees transit as a human right. We have a vision of public transit that is underwritten by a vision that sees transit as a fundamental human good, and that is not the kind of vision that John Tory espouses. Essentially, his idea is that we need to be able to accelerate the economy, and it is the vision that goes hand in hand with the Toronto Board of Trade vision, and one of their statistics is that it costs the Toronto economy about $6 billion a year in lost revenue, because people are stuck in gridlock, stuck in their cars, whereas they should be contributing to the economy, they should be either consuming or else being productive workers. So although it may seem like transit activists and John Tory are in some form strange bedfellows because we're both pushing for more transit, we're coming from very different places. John Tory wants to make sure that people from the outer suburbs can be brought into the financial downtown sector so that they can contribute to the capitalist economy, and that is not the kind of vision that animates the work that we do. We certainly see the struggle for free public transit as connected to the struggle for good quality jobs, for the struggle against gentrification and so on. But again, it's really important to emphasize that, well, for some people it may seem that we should be happy with John Tory having been elected because he is the transit mayor. The kind of politics that drive him and his agenda are diametrically opposed to the kind of vision that we bring to our work. And we very much hope that you're on board with our vision rather than John Tory's vision, and that we will see some of you at our future campaign work and future events. Thank you.